Let's just start and see what happens. We will kill Khamenei quickly. Then they will kneel. Then they will come to a nuclear agreement. And I will announce a great success before the midterms. Sit with that for a second. This is not a leaked script from a bad movie. That is not Iranian propaganda dressed up to make America look reckless. That is not speculation from an armchair analyst. That is a named Brookings Institution fellow with direct sources inside both the White House and Ankara, quoting word for word the decision architecture behind the most consequential military operation of 2026. The most powerful military alliance in human history. 90 million people on the other side. A war. And the plan was, let's just start and see what happens. No contingency. No phase two. No answer to the question every Iran expert in Washington was screaming from the moment the first bomb dropped. What if they don't kneel? They didn't. 5 weeks later, the war is still running. The exit ramp is nowhere visible, and somewhere in the back of a plane that is still being assembled in midair, Washington and the Kurds are sitting next to each other, neither trusting the other, neither able to get off. That tango is what we are dissecting today. Buckle up. Let's start with the Kurdish question, because this is where the theater gets interesting. Within days of the operation stalling, the American civilian bureaucracy, and we are told it may have started with a phone call from Senator Lindsey Graham, suddenly remembered the Kurds. Wait a minute, there are Kurds. Kurds? Great. Who should I call? This is confirmed. This is from named sources in Ankara and Washington. This is not a conspiracy. This is how superpowers improvise when the plan runs out on day 5 of a 4-day war. Now, the Kurdish question.
Finally, right? The Kurds deserve their state. They've been fighting forever. This is their moment.
Maybe, but let's trace the actual mechanics, because the history between Washington and the Kurds is not a love story. It is something much more interesting. It is a tango between two partners who each believe they are leading. The United States has a long and consistent pattern with Kurdish forces. Arm them, use them, achieve the objective, withdraw support, watch them get crushed. Repeat. It happened in Iraq after the first Gulf War. It happened in Syria after ISIS. It happened in northeastern Syria when Trump withdrew and the Turkish offensive began. Every single time the formula is the same. The Kurds are the best ground force in the region, disciplined, motivated, battle-hardened, and fighting for something real. And every single time, Washington discovers that the Kurdish cause becomes inconvenient the moment the immediate objective is achieved. The Kurds know this. They remember every single betrayal with the precision of people who paid for those betrayals in blood. So here is the dynamic that nobody on television is naming clearly. Neither side can finish the game, and neither side wants to. Washington needs Kurdish pressure on Iran's western flank. Without ground actors inside Iranian territory, the air campaign achieves damage but not resolution. You can bomb Iran's air defenses, its missile arrays, its command structure, and Iran keeps fighting. Because Iran was built to absorb air campaigns. 47 years of preparation for exactly this scenario. The Kurds need Washington's protection, weapons, and political cover to survive the pressure from Tehran, Baghdad, and most importantly, Ankara. But here is the trap inside the tango. If the Kurds deliver too much, if they actually destabilize Iran's western provinces, create facts on the ground, establish autonomous control, Washington has to decide whether to back a Kurdish political entity against the explicit red line of a NATO ally. And if Washington delivers too much, if they actually commit to a Kurdish state as the end state, they blow up NATO. They hand Erdogan a domestic mobilization moment, and they create a second front before the first one is dissolved. So both sides are doing something very specific. They are giving just enough to keep the other engaged, not enough to trigger the consequences they cannot manage. This is not a conspiracy. This is a rational behavior from two actors who both understand that the leverage disappears the moment the objective is achieved. The carrot stays on the stick precisely because delivering it ends the relationship. What comes next requires you to pay attention. If you're not subscribed to Eagle's View, do it now. This analysis does not simplify to fit a headline. You need the full map. This is where we build it. Now, Turkey.
Turkey is a NATO ally. It has the second largest army in the alliance. It controls the Bosphorus. You cannot just push Turkey around.
Let's look at Turkey through a different lens, not the military balance sheet, the civilizational one. A civilization durability is not measured by its army. It is measured by three things: what it believes about itself at the deepest level, what holds it together when the incentives fail, and whether its governing class actually represents those roots or has severed them. Apply that to Turkey and the picture is disturbing. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk performed an extraordinary surgery on Turkish identity in the 1920s. He replaced the Arabic script with the Latin alphabet. He removed approximately 60% of the vocabulary, the Arabic and Persian words that carried centuries of religious, philosophical, and cultural meaning, and substituted artificial constructs. He abolished the caliphate. He banned religious education. He built a republic on a Tier 1 foundation that was essentially invented from scratch. The result is a population that has been for a century genuinely uncertain about what it is. Are they Muslim? Officially secular, but Erdogan has been dialing the religious register back up for 2 decades. Are they heirs to the Ottoman Empire? The Republic was explicitly built on rejection of that inheritance. Are they Western? Europe has been rejecting Turkish EU membership for 30 years. Are they Eastern? Russia is simultaneously a partner on gas pipelines and an adversary on every active conflict from Libya to Syria to the Caucasus. This is not a caricature. This is the structural reality of a civilization whose Tier 1 worldview and Tier 2 cultural identity were surgically removed and replaced with a political project. Iran's Tier 1 and Tier 2 survived every invasion for 2.5 millennia because the Persian language and the Shia identity still survived. Turkey's Tier 1 was replaced by a flag and a parade. The wound is 100 years old and it has not healed. Now add the material conditions. Inflation running at 33%, a currency that has lost the majority of its value over the last decade, an economy deeply integrated into Western financial systems that are themselves under stress, a governing coalition held together by Erdogan's personal political survival instinct rather than genuine ideological consensus. And now add the external pressure. Turkey was told the Iran war would last 4 days. 5 weeks in, Iranian munitions are hitting Turkish territory. The US quietly explored arming Kurdish groups on Turkey's border and only walked it back after Ankara's explicit objection through back channels. The United States' closest regional partner, Israel, has already designated Turkey as a future problem. Next, Iran. That is not analysis. That is an Israeli strategic signal, and those signals have a track record. Turkey is not about to collapse tomorrow, but Turkey is a civilization whose Tier 1 is hollow, whose Tier 2 is fractured, whose Tier 3 is cracking under economic pressure, and whose Tier 6 military, currently its only genuine source of leverage, is being asked to hold together what the higher tiers cannot. Compare that to Iran for a moment. Iran's Tier 1 survived the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasion, and 47 years of Western sanctions. It survived because the Persian language survived. The cultural memory was never surgically removed. The alphabet was never changed. The writing is still the same. You can kill an Iranian supreme leader, you cannot kill what he represented to the civilization beneath him. That is the difference between a root system and a flag. When Tier 6 is all you have left, you are not strong. You are performing strength. There is a difference, and the people watching from Washington and Tel Aviv know exactly what that difference looks like. So where does this leave the map? The Kurdish tango continues. Washington will give weapons, political cover, and selective air protection. The Kurds will apply pressure on Iran's northwestern flank, demonstrate enough capability to remain indispensable, and stop well short of any action that would force Washington to choose between them and Ankara explicitly. Turkey will absorb, protest, and quietly negotiate. Erdogan will play the victim of American betrayal for domestic consumption, while simultaneously accepting whatever security guarantees keep the economy from complete collapse. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who lost his wife and daughter in the same strike that killed his father, is not a figure inclined toward rapid compromise. He is a figure whose entire identity has just been defined by martyrdom and revenge. The Jiang model tells us exactly what comes next when the Tier 2 cultural layer has been activated at this intensity. You do not negotiate from grief, you consolidate from it. And the war that was supposed to last 4 days enters its 6th week with no visible exit ramp. A plane still being assembled in flight, and 2 passengers in the back of that plane running out of reasons to trust each other, but not yet enough reasons to stop. Now, one more thing, and I say this not as a prediction, not as a recommendation, and not as advocacy for any particular outcome. But if you are watching this from a certain theological tradition, if you are among the millions of Christians who read the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation and see current events as a prophetic map, then you already know what territory we're standing in. The ancient land, now roughly occupied by Kurdish majority regions, southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, northwestern Iran, northeastern Syria, is historically called Assyria, the biblical empire, the one that destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, the one that features prominently in the end times frameworks across multiple Christian theological traditions. Is a modern state on that territory coming? Not tomorrow, not in this conflict. The structural barriers are real. Kurdish fragmentation, Turkish opposition, Iranian resistance, great power vetoes at the United Nations. But in a 10 to 20-year horizon, if the current conflict reshapes the regional map, if Turkey continues its structural decline, if the Kurdish tango with Washington produces enough facts on the ground, the possibility is not zero. I know that's a lot of ifs. Still, the possibility is quite tangible. I'm not proposing this. I am observing that history sometimes moves toward outcomes that look like mythology until the day they become geography. Whether that means anything to you depends entirely on what you believe about how history works. The rest of us will just keep watching the map. The next Eagle's View goes deeper into each of these trajectories: the Kurdish endgame, Turkish structural timeline, and the financial architecture cracking under the weight of a war that was supposed to be over before it started. Subscribe now. The map is moving faster than the news cycle can follow. That's a wrap for today, my friends, and I see you next week.